Rush is my favorite Battlefield game mode. I fell in love with it back when Bad Company launched in 2008, when it was called Gold Rush 12v12 on consoles, and it was just such a clutch game mode. It almost perfectly blends squad play, teamwork, infantry, and sometimes vehicles into this linear, push-style game mode where the team thinking clearly and efficiently is more than likely going to win. In Battlefield 6, the mode leaves a lot to be desired. Unfortunately, the mode that's been delivered so far in the beta is quite a ways from those glory days of Bad Company and Bad Company 2, and instead we've been delivered a scenario that might be very familiar to Battlefield fans. A mode that feels shoehorned onto maps not designed for it. Almost like a box checked off during development. Hopefully today, this feedback that I'm about to give will end up in the right hands, or it'll be heard by the right ears, and that the dev studio working on Battlefield 6 can make some improvements, because despite the mode being rather bad right now, I don't think it's unsavable, and quite frankly, a few changes here and there, and the mode will feel a lot better and actually deserve its place in the game mode lineup. If you go on to enjoy this video, drop it a like and subscribe for more Battlefield 6 content, and make sure to share your thoughts and opinions down below in the comments. And yes, I've got a horrific cold. That's why my voice sounds funny. You just have to deal with it today. For me, the Rush game mode is unlike any other in Battlefield. It adds some structure to the chaos that often unfolds around you, and it focuses teams directly on objectives that must be interacted with in order to progress the mode. The chaos, the destruction, the interesting gunfights, the vehicles, and everything you expect from a Battlefield game is still there, but it has a little bit more order to it. Maps like Isla Inocentes, Laguna Presa, White Pass, Cold War, Arica Harbor, and even more from Bad Company 2, and then I'd say Damavan Peak from Battlefield 3, they elicited some of the best moments that I can ever remember playing Battlefield. Because not only did I have all of the tools that I expect in my arsenal to play Battlefield, you have everything that you would have in Conquest, but you have a more focused goal to achieve. And by extension, every positive or negative action taken by your team inherently holds more weight in Rush. Let's say your team managed to land on the beach of Laguna Presa, push all the way around the edge of the jungle and arm an MCOM, taking out multiple enemies along the way. That feels like a massive achievement in Rush. The same applies if you were able to take out an attacking vehicle as a defender. You temporarily stop the attackers in their tracks. Or maybe you managed to sneakily position yourself far away from the MCOM with a sniper and a line of sight to it, and then you landed a headshot on a defender who thought they'd make it over to disarm the bomb in time. All of those moments have additional weight in Rush because of the focus of the game mode. Now, Battlefield 6 Rush, largely, at the moment, doesn't have that emphasis. Now, let's get the most obvious thing out of the way here. Not all of Battlefield 6's maps are going to work for the Rush game mode. Rush is designed largely to be a linear, funneled experience where an attacking team will push forward in multiple waves using revives and spawn beacons to sustain a push to the point where, hopefully, they're able to arm an MCOM and force the defending team to shift out of their defensive pattern and create some chaos. In my experience so far, the only map that really allows for this kind of gameplay is Liberation Peak, due to the space that it has within each sector. On Siege of Cairo, and especially on Empire State and Iberian Offensive, there simply isn't enough room in certain sectors to allow for a meaningful attacking push. And by the time the attacking team have reached the MCOM set, the defending team have already pushed right up to the line between the attacker spawn and the defender spawn. There's simply not enough space on some of these maps. Add into that what appears to be a bug right now, where defenders, after an MCOM set has been taken by the attacking team, are still able to spawn on active spawn beacons placed in the taken area, and you get this absolute meat grinder of infantry just smashing into each other in massively condensed spaces. Rush works best with space, the ability to traverse from one MCOM base to the next, using different lanes and flanking routes in order to switch up the gameplay and try and outfox the defending team. That's not really possible in Battlefield 6 right now. It's also worth mentioning that outside of Liberation Peak, the MCOM positions in each base are far too close to one another, giving the entire 12 defending players too easy of a time being able to cover both MCOM positions at once, as opposed to having to split themselves up and balance themselves across two different areas within a sector. Empire State is perhaps the most egregious example here, with the first stage MCOM set only being about 20 meters apart, one at the top of an internal zipline and one at the bottom. So it's easy for the defenders to react, and attackers are largely powerless to stop the pile of 12 defenders zooming over to the MCOM that's just been armed. Usually attackers would then try and attack the second MCOM, but with them being so close, you've got almost no chance. It's a total mess right now. And get this, the final stage of objectives on Empire State, if you manage to get there, it has an MCOM, I kid you not, that's 3 meters from the defender spawn line, behind a destructible wall that defenders can sit looking right through, leaving attackers almost zero room to attack the MCOM and potentially arm it before they are shot and killed. It's kind of mental. I actually agree with my good friend the Tactical Brit, who tweeted after only about 45 minutes to an hour of playing Rush the other day, that it feels as though the Battlefield 6 version of Rush was designed and implemented by a team that have never played Rush before, or at the very least, didn't experience Rush during its golden era of Bad Company 2. Now, I think I know where the issue stems from with Rush in Battlefield 6. It was the introduction and continued presence of the Breakthrough game mode. Now, this was first added to Battlefield 1, it was called Operations back then, but then it was fitted into Battlefield 5 as Breakthrough. And I remember having a meeting at the DICE offices, I remember this very clearly, when I first learned about the Breakthrough game mode. The devs told us that it was being added as a second 64-player game mode into Battlefield to give players the experience of Rush 64, but with more appropriate objectives for the number of players. Rush 64 alludes to custom servers in Battlefield 3, Battlefield 4, where server owners would literally crank the player numbers to 64 players, 32 versus 32, and the game mode would just descend into absolute mental chaos. Rush was originally designed for 12v12, 24 players in total, but expanded to 16v16 in Bad Company 2 on PC, where the maps were able to support a slightly larger player count, and that's kind of where it stayed for quite some time. Then moving into Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4, as I mentioned, server owners would increase the player count up to 64, and you'd get an absolute mess of a game mode. So the introduction of Operations and Breakthrough largely solved that need for a 64-player linear game mode. But instead of needing to arm objectives, now it was capturing flags and capturing sectors, giving you a little bit more of the tug-of-war feeling with all of those players involved. That could then leave Rush to be 16v16 or even 12v12, a more focused game mode where all of the Battlefield action could still happen, but greater reward was placed upon good strategy and teamwork. However, if we fast forward to Battlefield 6, we now have a situation where Rush is becoming more like Breakthrough, the exact game mode that was created to differentiate the experiences. We've got this hyper-speed, chaotic mess on tiny maps like Empire State and Iberian Offensive, with next to no room, arguably no clear reward for solid team play, and zero space for good attacking and defending plays. If Rush and Breakthrough are too similar, why even bother having the two modes at all? Even with the smaller 12v12 player count in Rush, the devs have somehow managed to make Rush feel as messy and chaotic as Breakthrough, which has got 64 players in it. You might as well ditch Rush and be done with it if the style of game mode you wish to support is unorganized chaos. Personally, I hope that doesn't happen. I don't think it will. I think Rush is here to stay. But here's what I'd actually do to fix Rush in Battlefield 6. Firstly, I'd take true inspiration from Bad Company and Bad Company 2 and simply not support Rush on maps where it doesn't work. Right now, of the 4 beta maps, I think the only map that is currently suited to Rush is Liberation Peak. And the only other map that I think with some tweaks can be made to support the game mode is Siege of Cairo. We know Battlefield 6 is using a system called combat zones, where certain areas of the maps in the game are designed with certain game modes in mind to make sure as many maps can support all game modes. And that's good, in theory. More maps on more modes equals more content to enjoy for players. Great. However, since probably Battlefield 3, that's never been something I think DICE can say with confidence they've ever been able to achieve. And if anyone right now can look at Empire State and Iberian Offensive and say that the current layouts for Rush are using areas designed to support the game mode, I'd have to question if you've been drinking. Genuinely, I'd scrap Rush on Iberian Offensive and Empire State completely. Just delete them and don't bother supporting them. The maps do not have enough room on them, and they aren't linear enough to support a game mode that is rooted deeply in forward pushes, multiple forward pathways, and flanking routes. And I think it would be better if all the effort around the game mode could be focused onto maps that actually could work for the game mode. Secondly, I'd be taking a serious look at the distance that the defending team is able to push up onto the attacker's spawn. Liberation Peak is actually a good example of this being done correctly, where the defenders are able to set themselves up around the MCOMs nice and easily, but they're unable to push up much further than that, and it's on the attackers to make their push up the map and towards the first base. The use of smokes and spawn beacons can massively change up how these pushes take place during a match, but what you don't want is the defenders pushing so high that the attackers are unable to even get going in the first place. This leads to an increase in spawn-death cycles for the attackers, leading to a massive loss of tickets far too fast, and the game is over before it's even begun. Defenders should be defending, and attackers should be attacking. And anything that allows that clear distinction to be unbalanced or upended needs to be called into question and fixed as soon as possible. One point I was going to mention was the speed of the overall game mode feels entirely too fast. But thankfully, the devs have already made a small adjustment to this based on some feedback from the beta, and this change is actually live now in the game, and it does make the mode feel a little bit less chaotic and a little bit more tactical. The respawn timer for defenders in Rush is now fixed to 12 seconds, rather than being a variable amount between 6 and 12 seconds. So this adds a fair bit more weight to the attacking teams taking out defenders, and if they're able to clear an area and arm an MCOM, there's a significant amount more time before defenders can potentially get back to the area. However, one other change that's been made is a reduction of the MCOM timer from 45 to 30 seconds, giving attackers a greater chance of getting an MCOM destroyed. And this, for me, it feels like a step too far, and it feels like a change made to try and patch over the larger issues of the Rush game mode on tiny maps where it doesn't work. So instead, I'll refer back to my first point. Don't have the game mode on maps where it doesn't work, and then you won't have to bend a rule that's been part of Rush for over a decade at this point. MCOM timers have always been 45 seconds. I don't think they've ever been less than that. And something else that desperately needs looking at is the space between MCOM positions within sectors. It was borderline nonsensical in some places. I've mentioned the Empire State MCOM that's 3 meters from the defender spawn line already, and the 2 places at either end of an internal zipline. They just feel like really basic errors that ought not to have ever made it to a near final build of the game. Having more space between MCOM locations forces the defensive team to split up and guard their objective as smaller units, and it encourages attackers to potentially try and arm one MCOM first and then rotate to the second one afterwards. There has to be a better balance here, and I have to say, I think Liberation Peak gets it mostly right, but there's still plenty more space in each MCOM sector and room for them to be spread out further if the devs think that's needed. The best example is actually Sector 1. One MCOM by the AA cannon location on one side of the road, and the other in the main base inside the shipping container building on the other side of the road. Splitting your forces across 2 MCOM sites also encourages more of those important Rush elements, like squad wipes, placing strategic spawn beacons in good locations, and potentially creating a power shift by taking out a valuable asset like a defensive machine gun position, or an enemy vehicle, for example. To me, though, the most disappointing aspect of Rush in Battlefield 6 is it's had its identity almost completely stripped away. We no longer have this more focused game mode, where the action washes over you in gentle waves, but then it ramps up in intensity when enemies get close to the MCOM sites. That pull and push of attackers moving forward, and defenders setting themselves up for an onslaught. What we now have is a scaled-down version of Breakthrough, which is ironic because Breakthrough was originally designed to placate players who wanted the insanely scaled-up version of Rush 64. Despite the 12v12 player count, somehow Rush feels as chaotic as Breakthrough at the moment, with barely any downtime between attacker pushes or defender disarms and resets. We've essentially got 2 game modes that are vying for the same space in the game. So what needs to happen, in my view, is an acceptance that Battlefield 6 maps are not all going to work for the Rush game mode, which is fine, and the mode should be restructured to feel more like it did during the Bad Company 2 and Battlefield 3 days. I'm perfectly okay if Battlefield 6 launches and Rush is only supported on, say, 4 of the 9 launch maps, provided those maps properly support the mode and allow it to play as it should. And I can see maps like Mirak Valley and Operation Firestorm providing vastly superior experiences simply because they have so much more room on them, and it will allow for those advancing pushes from attackers, and the inclusion of some other vehicles, transport vehicles, maybe even transport helicopters, that will go a long way to keeping the chaos level up when things do get hot. One thing that the devs do have, though, is time on their side. The game launches in another 6 weeks or so now, so plenty of time for them to play around with all the intricacies of the Rush game mode. But I think the most important decision they're going to have to make is whether they're going to persist on keeping all game modes on all maps, even when the game mode, like Rush, clearly doesn't work on some maps. Perhaps I've been spoiled in the past with some incredible Rush maps in previous Battlefield games, but in Battlefield 6, I'd love the Rush game mode to be so much better than it is right now. So that's all I've got to say about Rush. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments section. Whether you agree with me or not, I'm interested to hear what you've got to say. Drop a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe as well, and I'll catch you in the next one.